Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of our attendees joining us today for this latest Data Science Central webinar. This is Sean Welch, your host. I'm the webinar producer at Data Science Central. I'd like to start off our event today by thanking Trifacta for sponsoring today's event. Trifacta is a longtime supporter of the Data Science Central community. We're honored to have them sponsoring our event today. Today's webinar is entitled 20 Predictions in Data for 2020 from AI to Data Management, to be presented by Trifacta. Before we begin, I'd like to briefly review the format of today's webinar. Today's event will be 1 hour long. We have 3 presenters who I'll introduce in just a minute. There will be a 10 to 15 minute Q&A following the presentation, and this event is being recorded and will be available on datasciencecentral.com later this afternoon following today's live event. I'd also like to encourage our attendees to provide questions throughout the presentation. We will be reviewing and presenting them on your behalf during the Q&A portion of today's event. I'm very pleased to introduce today's speakers, Will Davis with Trifacta, and Eric Kavanaugh and Evren Çakır, both with the Buzzword Group. Will Davis is head of marketing at Trifacta. He spent the past 10 years managing the marketing initiatives for several high-growth data companies, including Good Data, Pivotal, and Clear Story Data. Most recently, Will led product marketing at Trifacta for over 5 years, where he focused on building the category of data preparation and establishing Trifacta as the top vendor. He holds a bachelor's degree from Brown University. Eric Kavanaugh is the CEO of the Buzzword Group and a career media professional who designs and manages an array of web-based research and media products, including The Briefing Room, World Matters, Hot Technologies, as well as DM Radio and Inside Analysis, which are both now broadcast coast to coast in 25 plus markets, reaching upwards of 1 million listeners per episode. He is recognized as a luminary in the field of big data and recognized by Techopedia and Big Data Republic as one of the top experts to follow on Twitter. Evren Çakır is a full-stack developer and proven team leader with nearly 25 years of experience building some of the most innovative web and enterprise solutions in the world. Among his many achievements, he created a big data visualization app for cancer research that won the prestigious Technology Innovation of the Year award by Genentech. The app allows research scientists to extract data, create cohorts, and find insights in massive data sets by just using a mouse. Most recently, working for Zillow and Trulia, he built a real-time personalization framework based on micro-personas, and also pioneered the development of serverless real-time data pipelines for processing real estate leads. An expert in microservices and hybrid cloud architectures, he also specializes in blockchain technology and has a keen understanding for how to secure Bitcoin, even as modern ASICs and quantum computing threaten to rewrite that entire history. He is deeply connected to an array of the world's brightest minds in blockchain, including lawyers who currently work with the governmental regulatory bodies Switzerland and Liechtenstein to craft legislation for managing cryptocurrency, as well as with recent developments with a silver-backed cryptocurrency. He holds a consultant's position with the firm. He recently also joined the Buzzword Group as senior analyst for data science and blockchain, where he will also serve as product director for Media Lens, the world's first pure-play content aggregation and syndication engine designed specifically for Twitter. Thanks for being with us today, Will, Eric, and Evren. We're looking forward to your presentation. AI, machine learning, cloud, self-service, data governance, etc. There's no shortage of buzzwords in data today. Every organization is seeking to outpace their competition by leveraging data to drive differentiation for their business. To win this race, companies are building up data science teams, investing in faster / more scalable cloud data platforms, and utilizing the growing variety of publicly available data sets and algorithms. How do you stay ahead of what's next and help drive the successful adoption of new technology and processes within your organization? Today's Data Science Central webinar We'll be interactive and we'll review where we think data management, analytics, and ML/AI are headed next. The session will also focus on how to use the predictions and data we share in the session to drive modernization efforts at your company. In today's webinar, you can expect to learn, will cloud-native services and Kubernetes fundamentally change our approach to data infrastructure and application integration? Will the buzz around machine learning continue, or will the first ML initiatives stumble out of the gates? And how will the nature of self-service change with an increased focus on data governance and security? Will, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you. You can begin as soon as you're ready to go.
Great. Thanks, John, for that wonderful introduction. We are super excited to be able to share some predictions for the coming year and what we think are going to be key trends in AI and data management. So we're using the theme of 20 for 20. So we have quite a few predictions from Eric, Evren, and myself. We'll each provide a little bit different perspective on where we think the space is going. Eric, as notable analyst and thought leader in the data analytics space and also CEO of Bloor. Evren is more of a developer practitioner and more of a hands-on view, and then myself from the view of what we see at Trifacta with our customers and where they tell us they're heading and broader trends that we see in the market. So with that, I'm super excited to pass it off to Eric so he can kick off the predictions.
All right, thank you so much, Will, and I'm very excited to be here as well. And folks, let's just go ahead and dive right in. We have quite a few slides for you, so let's talk about what we see out in the marketplace. Here's a high-level view of my 7 trends here. You can see it starts with artificial intelligence and machine learning. Obviously, analytics has been hot for quite some time. Alternative data, that's one of my hot-button issues I'll talk to about for a moment. Of course, data fabric is a term that's being widely used these days. Automation, I think that's probably the biggest one. Maybe I should have made it number 1. We'll talk about that in a minute. Fast data is changing things, and we kind of stumbled upon a term, sad data, the other day, which I find slightly amusing. So first of all, let's talk about artificial intelligence. So I'm a media person. I've been a media guy now for 30 years, and I can tell you one thing about the media that I've learned through experience, and that is the narrative is always wrong. So here's a quote, by the way, by Larry Tesler, who just said AI is whatever hasn't been done yet. That's a tongue-in-cheek comment by a real professional, but it's very similar to what I've heard from my good buddy Ted Dunning, who has been a machine learning expert now for many years. And the point is that AI is a term that gets largely bandied about in loose ways, let's just say. But it's really everywhere these days, specifically machine learning, but to a lesser extent, artificial intelligence. Self-driving cars obviously use artificial intelligence, but machine learning is all over the place these days. And when I say the narrative is wrong, what I mean by that is think about the narrative of AI in the news. It's the red-eyed robots who are going to take over the world. It's going to eradicate all these jobs, all this terrible stuff. And I would tell you that is all nonsense. Machine learning is a very powerful set of technologies and algorithms that are largely going to facilitate just about every job out there in some significant way. And I would argue that AI in general and machine learning are going to help rewrite just about every business process over the course of the next 10 years or so. And if you look around, you can see it everywhere. So think about in Google, if you use Google Mail and you use the actual client through the browser, you probably notice that Google is completing sentences for you. Well, that's machine learning. Now, 5 years ago, it would have been very difficult to pull that off. But now there's so much data, there's so much information, the computational power of these cloud vendors is so remarkable that we can do this stuff. So that's a tedious job, and really it's going to be more along the lines of taking, let's say, 100,000 purchase orders and finding the 742 that have some problem. That's a problem that machine learning can tackle vastly easier than a human being. And by the way, which human being wants to do that? Nobody wants to do that kind of thing. So look at machine learning and AI as enablers of business processes. And the companies that embrace these enablers are going to surpass their competition in no time. I mean, it's really very compelling what you can benefit from if you leverage these technologies. But you do have to think about it, putting them into the practice. That's the hard part, right? That's where rubber meets road, and actually connecting machine learning algorithms to your business processes, that's still the difficult part. that we're sorting out right now. If you have a microservices architecture, we'll talk about that later, you're going to be much more equipped and agile to leverage these technologies, and that's why you see so many companies looking at Kubernetes. We talked about that in the opening. So let's talk about analytics. This is a slide from Google Analytics talking about page views by browser family, some interesting trends there. You know, we used to talk about business intelligence, and that was primarily driven by relational data in a data warehouse, transactional data, how many widgets were bought in this segment of our market, for how much money, what was the profit, all that kind of stuff. That's traditional business intelligence. Analytics really came along in the business analytics sense, where we used other forms of data to understand what's happening. Well, think about the preponderance of data that's available these days for analytics. You can find covariance in all kinds of things. In market trends, for example, that are visible on Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter or any of these social engines, social data is a tremendously rich reservoir of data, especially around sentiments, understanding what people think, how people view your brand. And I can tell you the most advanced companies right now are using that kind of analysis to very quickly ascertain which products or services are working and which are not. You get into the reputation management space too. If you can track something that's happening with respect to your brand right now with social media sentiment, you can take action and really make some changes. And as the old saying goes, a stitch in time saves 9. So there is this term advanced analytics, and I would argue that, well, it's probably just a marketing term, but we also see trends like embedded analytics. And frankly, I think that's one of the biggest trends is actually white labeling, as they say, analytical capabilities inside existing operational systems. That's a really big deal. And there's another sort of sub-trend I've seen across different sort of super trends, if you will, of enabling embedded analytics in all sorts of applications. So you see this in a couple different ways. Number one, I've seen some really interesting technologies in the sales automation space. And frankly, the MarTech 7,000 is what we talk about today. That's 7,000 applications, software as a service applications that do some aspect of sales and marketing automation. Well, there are technologies right now, as a company I came across, that will tap into all of your various tools, your Salesforce, your CRM, your clickstream analysis, whatever the case may be. You could tap into all those different tools, and then this technology uses an AI engine to tell your salesperson the next person they're going to call. So instead of cherry picking, the salesperson just follows the queue that's generated by an AI engine, which is tracking all of your different touch points across your environment. Well, that's some very powerful analytics, because what they're doing is, let's say you were supposed to call someone from Ford Motor Company next, but in the last 5 minutes, 27 people from General Electric were browsing around on your website looking for something. They track that by IP address. Well, the engine will sense that activity and then kick to the top of the queue your GE contact to call. That is the power of analytics with AI. That is very powerful technology. So next up, this is an article I wrote for LinkedIn, Outsider Trading, Alternative Data and the Future of Wall Street. Folks, this is a massive trend. Very few people understand the implications of what's happening here. In fact, in my northern home here in Pennsylvania, Representative Connor Lamb came by our house one day, which I thought was pretty impressive. He's a sort of rising star of the Democratic Party. And I showed him this information, and his jaw dropped. He said, "I've never thought of it like that before." I said, "Well, hopefully you have thought of it now like this." So alternative data is the use of third-party data sources to determine various things about market dynamics. And I can tell you for sure, because I've studied this now, there are many, many players in this whole space. There are many players in the alternative data space, and it's tremendous the value that you can glean. So think about credit card data. There's a company out of San Francisco that can come to your business, let's say you have a restaurant, and tell you how much money you made last month. And they can tell you which patron paid how much. How do they do that? Because they buy the transactional data from the credit card company. So if you think about that at scale, and there are companies that are doing this at scale, that means you can tell whether or not certain entities are going to meet or beat their earnings estimates, which means you know who to bet on in the stock market. And I would argue that the reason the stock market keeps going up, 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 up is in part due to the fact that this outsider trading process has become so mature, and therefore the people who have the benefit of that data are just winning and winning and winning. Think about if you're playing a game of poker with your 4 best friends, only trick is you can see all their cards. Well, you'll never lose unless you forget which hand beats which hand. You're never going to lose. You'll always know whether or not you're going to win. So alternative data is a massive trend out there. It's in the marketing space. It's in the stock market. You can buy alternative data to determine which products or services to sell in which markets. It's just a massive, massive space, and it's not going anywhere. So data fabric, this is a term that's come along really in the last few years, and I think it kind of spun out a little bit of that Hadoop movement that we've tracked, which is now subsided somewhat, but it's still out there. Hadoop is still alive and well. You don't hear a lot about it because of the cloud, quite frankly, because of cloud storage. But data fabric just refers to a more robust and comprehensive approach to provisioning data. So when we think about the past, you always would rely on a database to provision your data. Well, now there are lots of different ways you can get and store data and provision data. Well, we have data virtualization 2.0. There's some interesting vendors in that space right now. And of course, 1.0 was successful. There are companies like Composite Software and Denodo and some others that were doing data virtualization. Basically, it's sophisticated caching technique. But these days, again, with the benefit of machine learning and AI and analytics, well, guess what? We can do dynamic provisioning of data in ways that were just not possible 5 and 10 years ago. And that's just in time, quite frankly, because if you think about the appetite for data, the appetite for big data of all shapes and sizes, whether that's from technologies like Splunk, like log files, for example, whether it's social media data, whether it's transactional data from your partners, whatever the case may be, there's such an appetite for data these days that we need more than a traditional ODBC or JDBC driver to access our data. So data fabric is a really, really big space, and of course we keep hearing about data pipelines. So what are those? And basically data pipelines are like, instead of ETL, extract, transform, load, it's kind of like ETTTLT, for example. Lots of transforms happening in there. But you can do real-time data pipelines. That's something that my business colleague and partner Evren Çakır has done at Zillow. He's built real-time data pipelines. So he knows what that looks like from the ground floor. All right, moving right along. RPA, I think one of the most awkward acronyms we've come across, robotic process automation. Well, it doesn't have a whole lot to do with actual robots like the Terminator style. And I've talked to a number of very smart people who talk about how really these are mostly desktop automation tools. So if you think about a macro, when you create a macro in Excel, you just turn on the record button, you go through the process, open the file, make this change, do that change, do this process, etc. That's basically what RPA is, but across a vaster swath of enterprise infrastructure and functionality. So I would argue that automation, frankly, is the number one trend and is the number one movement in the enterprise space that is going to save time, improve efficiency, improve quality, etc., because we're pulling humans out of tedious tasks, right? Anything that's repetitive can be automated, and that's what's happening right now. The space is huge. It's going to get bigger by the day. And then there's intelligent process automation, which is also very, very interesting. I've come across some really fascinating technologies where companies are able to look at just raw documents that are part of your business profile or part of your business system and ascertain dynamically which part of the process they fill, whether it's a purchase order or a requisition or an RFP or just some document giving some warning about something, whatever the case may be, they can dynamically ascertain what that business process probably looks like and then allow you to codify its change. And sort of woven into this is another deeper, very interesting trend that again gets back to something I mentioned before of process mining. And to me, this is one of the most fascinating things I've come across. There are technologies now that allow your organization to ascertain exactly what the de facto business process is by tracking the data footprints across your application. So this is very interesting because hitherto you had to rely on the system itself, like your enterprise resource planning system, and the tooling around those systems was not very good for being able to see across those systems or even have too much flexibility within them to change processes. Well, if you get right down to it, digital transformation requires change. And so if you can't change what the process looks like, then what you have to do is pick up the phone and call someone and say, hey, Jim or Bob or Sue, can you change this, please? I've noticed this inefficiency in our process. Then you'd have to rely on that person to go do something, which typically required calling a consultant or an IT person or someone else to go in and change something. And guess what? They're busy. So a lot of stuff just didn't get changed. Well, some of these technologies allow you not only to see what the process is, but actually write back to the source systems and change the processes. I took a briefing last year in which I saw the first of these tools, and I almost fell off my chair. I said, this is amazing now. The business analyst can actually do something with the information. They don't just have to pick up the phone and call or hope that somebody listens, but the analyst can actually change the process, and that is a very, very, very big deal, folks. I'm very excited about what they call robotic process automation and intelligent process automation. These are the engines of transformation, and guess what? They all need data. They are all fueled by data. They all require data, and data is going to drive these changes in our organization. All right, moving forward, fast data, Apache Kafka, once again coming out of the open source community, wonderful, wonderful technology. So this was the engine that drove LinkedIn, quite frankly, and LinkedIn open sourced it a number of years ago. There's a company, Confluent, that sits on top of that project now and is doing amazing things. So fast data is streaming data, basically. You set up topics. And what's really interesting here, I use the analogy of the highway system. If you think about the old highways like Route 66, before the interstate highway movement came around, the old highways were sufficient. We got between cities, we got all kind of stuff transported, including people, products, et cetera. But then we built the interstate highway system around and on top of that. So you come into cities, of course, and the highways will come up over the roadways because they didn't want to have to tear up all the buildings with eminent domain or whatever. I look at Apache Kafka as basically the superstructure around the existing highway system. So you'll be able to access data in real time. What kind of data is that? Any kind of data you want. You can set up a topic for anything. You can tap into mainframes. You could tap into stock market data. You could tap into weather data. You could tap into social media data. Whatever the case may be, you can get real-time information. And what's really going to happen here, folks, is we're going to slowly but surely nudge away from the old archaic systems that are very slow and very legacy-oriented, if you will, latency-oriented as well. And we're going to be moving towards a much more real-time architecture all the way around. Now, there's an old joke. I love this joke. A guy named Gilbert Van Custom once said to me that elephants go to a special place to die, but there is no software graveyard. It all just goes to the cloud, which I thought was funny. But the point is, it's very difficult to sunset applications, whatever they are. They tend to stick around for a long time, but they are going to be ported to the cloud, and some of them are going to be supplanted or at least augmented with this fast data because fast is better. Who doesn't want fast? I promise you, fast data is going to remain a major force in the world of data. And with that, I come up to my last slide. This is a sort of tongue-in-cheek slide. It came up the other day. Sad data. Oh, poor sad data. Sad data is neglected data. I've actually heard a cool concept from a lady who we'll have on our radio show soon called data downtime. But sad data is basically bad data. It's data that really should have been fixed and wasn't fixed. In fact, Trifacta, of course, I think is really a pioneer in the whole data prep space. And what they did was absolutely brilliant in figuring out how to leverage frontline workers, how to weave in the knowledge of those frontline workers about the data that gets used every day. Because historically, if you think about it, a data quality project was primarily an IT project. It was done in batch. It was done in one fell swoop, and then people walked away. Well, data quality is not a project. It's a process. It's a commitment. And now, of course, we have all kinds of regulations that are going to mandate more efforts to make sure that data is accurate and that data is clean. So what Trifacta did with the data prep space is they really learned how to crowdsource data quality, which is brilliant because you're never going to have some top-down, inside-out strategy for improving data quality that will last very long or go very far. It just can't. The tentacles are too many. They are too long. They are too unwieldy. There's just no way from the top down or the inside up that you can solve all those problems. It's just not going to happen. And so what Trifacta did is they really started this whole data prep movement, enabling all sorts of end users to make changes and tracking their behavior, which actually is another interesting side trend I'll throw out before I hand it off to Evren. But behavioral analytics is going to be a huge trend as well. And behavioral analytics is literally tracking you, the end user, how you interact with technologies, what you do every day, how long you're on email. Think about your Fitbit or just any sort of application on your phone that shows you how much you did in that week, how much time you were on this application, how many steps did you take, how long were you on that application. That kind of visibility is possible now. And guess what? Managers and senior managers and directors and VPs, et cetera, even individual employees are going to have access to that kind of information. So you'll be able to correlate the behavior across teams, across organizations, of individuals, et cetera, to understand what they're doing. And that is very, very powerful stuff. And with that, I will push Evren's first slide, and I'll start tweeting.
Thanks, Eric, and just hello, folks. According off Eric's last slide on SAD data, I would say if you're building bridges over your data moats, then you want to rethink your data strategy. And some of these next generation services provided by companies and vendors like Trifacta can help you do that. So with that, I'll move forward through the next slide. And let's see. All right. Yeah, so I'm going to be covering a series of slide predictions here. And they're all sort of have some interwoven themes that stretch across them. So on the high level, I'll be covering serverless. It's sort of a new paradigm in programming. And I'll be covering lambdas, which are a compute resource that make up serverless, one of the many services that serverless provides. We're talking about AI and how it's moving towards the edge for Internet of Things. Touching on smart contracts, sort of a outcome of the recent developments on blockchain and cryptocurrencies, and how that can help sort of provide glue and integration between systems. Touch on the browser wars and where things, where we are today and where we're headed. A little bit about apps and where that's going to take us, and then, of course, everyone's boogeyman, the 5G. And so, yeah. First off, we'll talk about serverless. So serverless is a sort of new paradigm in infrastructure provisioning and managing operations of infrastructure and resource. Basically, provides dynamic allocation of resources. Sort of cost is based on what you actually use rather than pre-purchased capacity. And on a high level, serverless has got several different meanings. It's worth disambiguating it when you're talking about it. But serverless as a general concept is sort of the next generation of cloud provider services provided by cloud providers that abstracts away all the need to think about the underlying resources and manage those. So I've been, in my time at Zillow, I was working on coining a phrase: if you got a problem and use a server to solve it, now you've got at least two problems. So, developers just want to get going, creating features and functionality and value, and if they have to worry about disk space and being overrun by logs and bringing the server down, then that's not really what their core value is that they're providing. So serverless abstracts that all away and provides a nice set of services that are fully managed, highly available across the planet, and sort of elastic versus scalable. So that all that is the scaling is abstracted away for you. And serverless provides databases and compute. And all the glue between the services and connection points for your data to flow through easily and for your developers to be able to develop quickly. So my time at Zillow, I worked on real-time data pipelines, which is fully serverless. So real time, changing the cadence of the way data is processed, and unblocking the data dams for additional insight into downstream, both upstream and downstream. Moving forward to the next slide here, touching on Lambdas. Lambdas are Amazon-specific implementation of closures or anonymous functions in the cloud. So they allow developers to basically provide run code, provision code, without having to worry about any of the underlying resources. They allows developers to publish that code immediately, so rather than have it running on their laptop and worrying about how they're going to make it available to the world, and Lambda provides that. There's no infrastructure to manage. You only pay for what you use, and it connects to API gateways and other connection points and event sources readily. So there's a lot of recent adoption of Lambdas, I believe. It can be used for, recently I talked to some folks who had a large unit automated testing suite that would take, I don't know, half an hour to run. And so Lambdas are great in this case because they can take jobs like that are easily parallelizable and implement them in a way that all your tests are running at the same time, or at least reduce the runtime for your test suite. So I thought that was a pretty cool use of Lambdas as well. Let's see. So file processing, unit testing, analytics, running actual websites and mobile applications are all Lambda potential Lambda use cases. And so then moving on to IoT, and so basically AI is going to be moving towards the is steadily moving towards the edge. Artificial intelligence and machine learning tends to have some concerns regarding security, privacy, and resource, both storing of the data and processing it. And as more and more IoT-enabled devices will inevitably hit the market, the movement of AI towards the edge will sort of reduce, increase performance, reduce privacy and security concerns by caching data locally, providing speedy responses and lower latency. That's in part due to neural networks that AI can be implemented on the edge. So it'll be sort of moving towards a more distributed intelligence, DI, or local intelligence, LI, type modalities. And the fact that Moore's law, which states that our compute power or capacity, RAM, storage, bandwidth is doubling every 6 months. We've been beating that thanks to Intel and all the chip manufacturers for quite a few years now. That means that in 6 months our phones will be twice as capable, our hard drives will be twice as big or twice as cheap, we'll have twice as much RAM, and our bandwidth will also be significantly increased. So that will allow us to be able to process data on the edge quicker and more efficiently. So that'll reduce costs, increase reliability, reduce latency, maybe address content rights and privacy and security. A good example might be computer vision, where do we really need to upload all that data to the server to make that make that decision in real time for you. So kind of address some of the privacy concerns that consumers might have as well. Let's see, moving on to the next slide here. Talk about smart contracts. Smart contracts, sort of an idea that was developed in the 90s by Nick Szabo, a computer scientist, lawyer, and cryptographer. I hate to use the term stored procedure, but maybe it's stored procedures done right. So it solves a big problem. Solving the big problem of Byzantine fault tolerance enabled security through decentralized networks, enabling smart contracts. So smart contracts, basically, to put it, to give you an example from the real estate world. So a use case that's not an untypical workflow across all businesses. Let's take a renter submitting an application to rent an apartment. So they submit an application. That goes on they submit an application, and then the landlord would approve the application, and then a lease would need to be sent out. and a payment request for a deposit would have to be made. So the way things are looking is that we can use the blockchain to store these events. It's immutable, highly secured by a decentralized network of nodes, and so that means that you can't change the chain without putting a lot of energy into it, because each block is then secured by additional blocks downstream. So if you want to change anything, you're going to have to rewrite all the blocks, and that is going to be kind of insurmountable. So the idea would be to put in this real estate use case, you put the events on the blockchain. So a renter submits an application. You put that in the audit trail on the blockchain. Then the landlord reviews the applications and approves one of the applications for a particular rental unit, and then what needs to happen next is that a lease needs to be sent out and a deposit needs to be made. So that's where smart contracts come in, because the blockchain is kind of inert, just stores the data, and smart contracts provide the sort of code and business logic for acting on the data. So once a smart contract sees the lease is approved, then it can send out a payment request for the deposit, send out a copy of the lease to be signed. And so smart contracts basically provide integration points across disparate business units potentially, or disparate groups. So you can think of it as a good way to reduce the manual work necessary for groups to integrate and folks to integrate. If you're going to be sending out a lease, typically you might think about who you need to put on the distribution list and who you need to CC. So you're pushing it up, and in this case, using smart contracts and blockchain, you can basically just tag your events, and the smart contract will pick it up and push the data out to whoever it needs to go to or act upon it. I recently presented in Dubai to over 60 ministers on blockchain in the government. They've got some interesting ministries, like the Ministry of Youth and Happiness, Finance and Health, the Ministry of the Impossible. In any case, blockchain is a big initiative for a lot of governments. Dubai is, UAE is hoping to put 50% of their government transactions on the chain, so that should reduce costs, increase efficiency, transparency, integration, that type of thing. Moving on, the browser wars. So the giants still clash, and Apple holds its own against Google, and we're used as pawns in the war. But browsers are basically what brings us together across walled ecosystems. And so, I think we're going to continue to see this moving forward. There's a lot of interesting browsers out there already. Chromium is also, sort of the bleeding edge for Google Chrome browser. The Brave browser, which is also a spin-off out of there, runs its own currency in the background. You can get paid to surf just by watching ads, and you're paid in basic attention token, which is an interesting concept if you think about it. And then Opera's also integrated, was one of the first to integrate digital payments recently in one of their recent versions. And so there's definitely some room for new entrants, tiny entrants, and that want to innovate, provide alternative implementations that, and features that's outside of just rendering the page. And so there'll also probably be some more interesting plays in the privacy tips. Iridium, IceCat, which prevents fingerprinting, provides fingerprinting countermeasures. And then we've got a whole slew of other browsers coming out for specialized use cases, like Amazon Silk, which works on the Amazon Fire, smart TVs, etc. And if you think about it, browsers are really just user agents, and that's what we call them in the developer world. And so, user agents can actually have a screen that you can browse through, or it can be a voice-based user agent, etc. And so we'll definitely see some movement away from staring at screens, talking to machines. And so those might even be considered browsers as well. Moving on to the last prediction here, 5G. Yeah, it's a boogeyman. It's kind of like quantum. What's going to happen? Well, I predict that thanks to Moore's Law, again, we are going towards a massive bandwidth streaming out of our phones or between our phones and the global network, all of our devices, and we're talking like a serious order of magnitude increase in that bandwidth. So 5G is going to allow for, well, in conjunction with increased compute, massive amount of tracking. We'll be able to track, I foresee that there's going to be pervasive tracking of browser events or any other types of events that on your devices. That'll enable sort of a new level of predictive analytics using AI, for example. And so, yeah, I think something to think about, and we'll see when 5G finally hits us. I know it's hit some of our markets, places like Dubai and other countries. It's already out there. So, it might be one of the reasons why we've been sort of holding back as well, because we want to own that data. So, and then actually, one more slide. So, one more prediction. So, apps will dominate. App development, one of the fastest growing industries still, and that's not slowing down. Entrepreneurs that build apps, or appreneurs, are steadily working on new new apps and based on tech advancements and new inventions that are coming live every day. So, I think we're going to see the specialized using these new technologies like AR, VR, think marketing, advertising, healthcare, manufacturing, and it's all going to be sort of driven by IoT and ML. And so I think we'll see a lot of interesting developments in the app world for sure to come in 2020 and going into the next decade. So, and with that, I'm going to hand off to Will. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks, Evren. It's glad to be reminded that I'm just a pawn in the browser wars, so appreciate your recommendations and your perspective. And Eric, likewise, totally agree with you on your point around RPA and automation. It's a huge trend that we see, and that's continuing to ramp up, especially as a lot of these workloads move to cloud-based environments where there's a lot of maturation around those technologies. All right, so I'm going to bump into my predictions and then give you a quick overview of what we do at Trifacta at the end in case you're interested in seeing the value that we're driving for organizations around data preparation.
All right, thanks Evren and Eric for those wonderful predictions. It's great, Eric, to see your predictions on behalf of someone who is the CEO of a research company, has been a long-time industry analyst in this space, to see where you think data and analytics are heading in the future. And then Evren, it's great to see your perspective as someone who is developer and hands-on with a lot of these technologies and processes that we're reviewing here. So appreciate both of you joining today's webinar, and really love the predictions that you have for next year. So now in the final portion of the webinar, I'll be giving you my predictions from head of marketing view at Trifacta, and also as someone who's been in the data analytics space for quite some time. And then towards the end, we'll give you a quick overview of Trifacta, what we do, the types of companies that we work with, and the value we bring to them before we close it out. So you're probably asking, who is qualified to give you these predictions? A little bit about me. I run marketing globally at Trifacta. I've been in the analytics and data management space for well over 10 years. I've had a diverse background from BI and data visualization, analytical infrastructure, and now sitting in between those two spaces with Trifacta and data preparation. So I'm based in Boston, but am often on a plane, and I'm not as prolific on Twitter as Eric, but I am on Twitter if you want to follow me and hear what I have to say about the industry. So moving into the predictions here, I'll share about 6 predictions, and these walk through the different ones I have here, starting with the democratization of data pipelines and the massive shifts that we're seeing in analytics modernization, what's happening in DataOps and how that moves from process to platform, the rise of data quality and that becoming much more of a buzzword than it is today, the challenges of silos and data governance around data like adoption and general self-service, and then cloud native and how organizations are going to be adopting that as a requirement for not only processes but also applications. So let's jump in. So after the Tableau conference, which is very much one of the highlights of the year from a trade show perspective in the analytics industry, I saw this piece by a friend of mine and the industry analyst, Dan Woods, and he had an amazing summarization of a speaking session during the conference that I believe was from an executive at Nissan. And the quote that I pulled from his piece here is, to fully realize the use of data in an organization, you need to be really good at creating data pipelines, tens or hundreds of times more than you have now. And you must do this in an affordable fashion. So this really, really struck out to me. And I think a lot of organizations are, looking at how do we, become digital innovators, or, how do we become data analytics innovators, and where does self-service come into there. And, there's a lot of different strategic initiatives that are happening across these organizations to leverage data more effectively, to innovate more quickly in different lines of business, and to bring these things together in sort of a very cohesive way. And I think Dan Woods pulled this together, that a lot of these initiatives actually require the data pipeline development to happen at a much broader scale and much more quickly and efficiently. And I think that's a really, really great, anecdote for, one of the leading conferences, and a key piece that he took away from that, and how organizations are trying to drive innovation with data analytics. And we see this across our companies, and this doesn't just impact, a data engineer whose key role is data pipeline development, but it impacts anyone who touches data within an organization, whether that's a data analyst, a data scientist, various people in lines of business. The challenge of taking data from these diverse platforms, whether it's databases, Excel spreadsheets, log files, applications, discovering what's in that data, structuring it, cleaning it, enriching it, validating that the data is accurate, and then deploying it into a variety of different downstream systems or applications for analytics is incredibly time-consuming. And only a few individuals in the organization generally can do this work. So, as we see the use of data analytics becoming more pervasive across organizations, we think that the data pipeline development and deploying of these data pipelines needs to, be broader, more efficient, and be done at a more scalable way. And then if you look at analytics modernization at these organizations and some of the process shifts that are happening at every level, it's amazing to see how, centralized IT-led decisions around analytical infrastructure or investments in data analytics are changing from traditionally being IT-held decisions and now being business-led. As analytics becomes more of a business driver and a driver of top-line growth, you see a number of analytics initiatives coming from lines of business, whether that's marketing, regulatory compliance and banking, risk. Different areas, business areas within these organizations are driving an aggressive agenda in investment of analytics and data management technologies. You're also seeing that organizations are now leveraging a much broader use of data. So traditionally, when you're just looking at transactions or data in relational databases, we're now analyzing data from a broader set of systems and applications. We're looking at interaction data, behavior data, log file analysis, all of these different rich sources of information that can improve customer service, improve efficiency, and drive innovation across business lines are, bringing about massive strategic advantages or competitive advantages for businesses. So the ability to actually utilize a broader set of information is core to how organizations are driving modernization efforts within their businesses. We're also seeing this platform shift happen. So, a lot of the legacy analytic technology would be an on-prem database that's in a centralized data center or in standalone servers across lines of business. And now all of this is moving to the cloud. Over a progressive amount of time, we're seeing organizations have massive investments in AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, Alibaba as well. And they're doing this for large organizations over a multi-year period, and then some organizations have very aggressive mandates to be cloud native within several months. So we're seeing this across every organization, every industry that we're working with, and that is going to continue to accelerate. And that's not only going to be a centralized cloud platform, but this is going to be hybrid multi-cloud environments pending the different use cases and data that these departments are touching. And then the organization shift in terms of how decisions are made and how analytics is used at these businesses is going to transition from top down, give me the KPIs, give me the core metrics that my businesses run on, to individuals who have the most context for their data, having iterative, collaborative experience with data with different members of their organization to drive new insights, to bring together new sources of data or new combinations of data, to really drive different innovative uses of data that can help the business. So instead of just driving core KPIs and ROI, we're seeing that this is going to drive a lot more innovation if this is happening from the grassroots level. And then 3, the concept of DataOps not only being a process, but also shifting into a platform. So if you're in this industry, DataOps is definitely a buzzword that you've heard more and more and more. And just to level set everyone, I wanted to provide a quick definition of what DataOps is. And this is one I stole from a company called Nextflow that I think is a really good summarization of DataOps. So in this quote, they say, DataOps is a function within an organization that controls the data journey from source to value. And so this is the process of taking data from its raw input and then all the work that takes place to then drive some value out of that data. And if you look at how Gartner views DataOps, it's not only a process, but it's also a platform. So I think the way that organizations in the industry generally understand DataOps today is that this is just a process of how you take data from different systems, bring it together, integrate it, prep it, and make it ready for use. I think Gartner is now viewing that DataOps is going to become a modern platform for data management. And there are going to be multiple different elements of this platform, from a data catalog, from data quality, from data preparation, and then data cataloging for curated data, and then the overall operationalization of that work. So, as organizations continue to research DataOps practices and how they can take a more agile approach to data management, I think you're going to see that this DataOps platform become a more of a landing place or centralized foundation of a lot of organizations' analytics, machine learning, and BI practices. And there's going to be a core tenets in that are all probably offered by separate vendors today, but you're going to see probably consolidation happen in the space of data cataloging, data quality, data preparation, and then sort of the data pipelining or operationalization of all that work that then feeds downstream analytics systems. And, in this slide, Gartner will call this the Agile Enterprise Information Management Platform, but more and more you're going to see this called the modern DataOps platform, as they say today. And then moving forward, data quality. So this is data quality, I think, is synonymous in people that have very long histories in analytics and data management. I think the definition of data quality, pending your levels of your years of experience in this industry, will differ. But I think as machine learning and AI become more and more of a focus and more of a strategic initiative across businesses, data quality will have an entirely new lens and new definition for a lot of organizations. And with this race to sort of win the AI and machine learning competitive battle, if organizations don't have good data quality, then all these initiatives will fail. So I have 2 articles here, one from Harvard Business Review and one from MIT Sloan, and they both advocate that your machine learning initiatives and tools are incredibly useless if the data quality is poor. And then there's another quote from MIT Sloan that says, machine learning race is really a data race. So the majority of the algorithms that are being leveraged in these AI initiatives are generally open source. They're freely available. There's not a lot of differentiation in terms of what algorithms organizations have access to and are leveraging as part of these initiatives. The competitive differentiation for them is actually the data that they're using to drive those algorithms. and the data that they're using to feed those models. And so as organizations invest more in this, data quality has become a very, very critical part of that strategy, and also the ability to create differentiated data to feed those models is going to become critical as well. And then moving on to prediction 5, I have a slide here that we called, oops, moved ahead 1 minute. So I have a slide here to demonstrate data silos and how silos and leads to data governance challenges, especially when it comes to data lake adoption. So at Trifacta, we call these disconnected loops. It's essentially when you have users working only with themselves on data and analytics that they're not necessarily sharing with their colleagues or being collaborative with other members of their organization. And this leads to a ton of repeated work, duplicated data, and then inconsistent definitions around different attributes or different analytic outputs. And if you're in an organization and you see this happening at scale, you see how destructive these disconnected loops can have in terms of trusting analytics and building a collaborative analytics organization. So different people bring different numbers to the table. There's not a lot of trust across those teams, and everyone has different definitions of what certain things look like. And so this will definitely hinder any organization's success around this, and especially if you're doing this across a massive data lake where you're landing a lot of different data within an organization, that the siloed work and the lack of overall data governance by having a centralized view into all the different work that these users are doing is going to really hinder data lake adoption and definitely hinder the overall analytics and data management success within organizations. And then prediction 6 is that cloud native is to become an architecture requirement of every organization, not only from how they think about implementing different processes within their data management stack, but also when it comes to applications and the requirements for the architecture of those applications. So I think you're seeing many organizations shift from traditional technology, maybe that's Teradata, maybe that's SaaS, that are developed and architected for on-prem environments that really don't have the elasticity, they don't have the native integration with cloud platforms such as Google Cloud, Amazon, and Azure. And so this is going to be an increasing requirement for a variety of different technologies as organizations shift to the cloud and have mandates to do that on aggressive timeframes. All of the investments that they're making are going to have cloud native architectures. That's every element of the stack: the application layer, the infrastructure layer, and everything is going to have to run across multiple clouds. And this is going to be something that we're seeing today, but is going to be ramping up more and more as we move into the future. So that's my predictions. With the time we have remaining, I'm going to quickly give you an update on what Trifacta does, the problems we saw, and why we're differentiated in the market. So Trifacta, we're exclusively focused on data wrangling. That's the process of getting data ready for analytics. So exploring what's in your data, cleaning it, structuring it, blending it together, and then building data pipelines that feed downstream systems. And the way we do that is we empower the people who know the data best with a self-service interface that leverages data visualization and machine learning recommendations to automate both the exploration of data and also the transformation of that data. We do this in a centralized platform that can be deployed upon a data lake environment, that can be in a cloud native environment, but also on-prem. And we can do that as a managed cloud offering or something that you deploy in your own AWS, Azure, or Google Cloud environment. So the key to this is by having a centralized platform, we enable IT to give users self-service access, but also maintain security and governance over all that data. So you have a single view into lineage, a single access point for security, and making sure that there isn't a lot of that siloed work that we talked about earlier. And this, by establishing an enterprise-wide platform, you're able to have this general landing zone and feeding ground for all of the people that work with data to leverage a wide variety of sources and work with a different variety of end users across their organization to really feed a data culture that will build upon itself. We've had a lot of success both in analytical use cases, but also operational use cases. So we have a sampling of our customers and the use cases that they have across predictive modeling, business intelligence, data onboarding, and then on the operational side, data migration, some audit testing, and then in banking, risk and compliance. And these are a sampling of the customers that we work with across many of the organizations. We have, well over 200 enterprise customers, and then across, our various products, over 20,000 organizations leverage Trifacta in some shape or form. So we have, obviously, as you can see here from this slide, a really big footprint in financial services, in pharma, healthcare, but a wide variety of industries, CPG, oil and gas, telecommunications. There are a wide variety of use cases across many different verticals that more effective, efficient, scalable data preparation can definitely bring massive amount of value. So why do organizations select Trifacta? 3 main points: enable self-service, improve speed, and then have cloud-native architecture. So on the self-service side, a lot of this comes down to the interface. So if you think about how the work of data preparation was done in the past, it was generally done using code or mapping-based ETL paradigms that a common business analyst wouldn't be able to use. So when you look at the Trifacta interface in this screenshot, it's a familiar grid-like interface. We have a variety of visual guides in the tool, so you can see data quality, you can see distribution of data, and it enables anyone who's familiar with Excel or Tableau to drive their data transformation and data prep work in a very self-service fashion. So we're enabling the people that know the data best while maintaining governance and lineage over the data. That's all self-documenting. So any transformation you apply to the data is automatically tracked, and anyone across the organization can see every transformation of data that happens within our technology. We're also focused on improving speed. So a lot of this is down to, once again, the interface and the overall workflow. So every transformation you apply to the data, you see an instant preview of how that transformation would impact the data itself. We also provide a number of machine learning driven suggestions. So as you interact with data in the application, we'll suggest to you, hey, do you want to blend this data source with a different source? Do you want to remove this column? Do you want to split this into 2 different columns? Do you want to, provide this different encoding on the data to help with some sort of algorithm that you're leveraging downstream? So making the process of designing data pipelines much, much faster for a variety of different end users. So as they're building these data preparation workflows, they're doing that with more efficiency and doing that in a much easier, more intuitive manner. And then once they've built the workflow, we also enable them to put that into production much more quickly. So once you have the entire workflow built out, leveraging that interface I talked about earlier, the ability to automate that into a data pipeline, to schedule that, to test it, to version control, to share it with others, extremely intuitive. And as long as you have the right permissions within your environment, you can do that incredibly fast. We also have a cloud-native architecture. This runs across any cloud environment, whether that's Amazon, Azure, or Google Cloud. We also support on-prem deployments as well. So if you're leveraging a Hadoop platform such as Cloudera, you can deploy Trifacta within that. So we can do this also as a completely managed cloud offering. So if you don't want to manage the infrastructure on your own, we can provide a deployment option where we manage everything for you, and all you have to do is log in and connect to different data sources. So if you don't trust some of the benefits that I provided there, every industry analyst that has covered the space of data preparation has ranked Trifacta as the top vendor. So this is across the Forrester Wave for self-service data preparation. There have been 2 published to date, and Trifacta has been the top-ranked vendor in both studies. Gartner has a Peer Insights review that is driven from end-user reviews of technologies, and Trifacta is the highest-rated vendor within Gartner Peer Insights. And then Dresner Advisory Services, Ovum, and Bloor have all published studies on data preparation, ranking Trifacta as the top vendor. So how to get started? We have a few different ways to go get started with our technology. If you go to trifacta.com, start wrangling, you can either sign up for a free trial if you're seriously considering Trifacta for your business. This is a 14-day limited time environment, but has full functionality. So you can connect to different data sources, you can run jobs at scale, you can schedule jobs, all the bells and whistles of our technology you can have access to for 14 days. if you just want to play around and see what our interface looks like and try it on some files and smaller data sets, you can use Wrangler. There's no time limitations to that product, but there are limitations around functionality, scale, and how much data you're able to work with within the application. So if you're intrigued after this presentation to give Trifacta a try, I definitely recommend you go to our website, go to Start Wrangling, and check out one of these options for yourself and talk to our team and see how we can help solve your problems. So with that, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I want to thank Evren and Eric for sharing their predictions and joining us on this webinar today. And I'll pass it back to you, Sean.
Will, Eric, and Evren, thanks for that excellent presentation. I have just a few quick announcements. Please mark your calendars for December 5th, 2019, and our next DSC webinar. Train and tune your computer vision models at scale. Also, today's taping will be available for on-demand viewing later today and can be found on the home page of Data Science Central in the Webinar tab located at the top of the page. And past webinars are available on demand at datasciencecentral.com. If you haven't had the opportunity to view them, I encourage you to take a look. They provide very useful insight into a wide variety of topics of interest to our data science community. This brings today's webinar to a close. I'd like to thank our audience for their attendance and thoughtful questions, and a special thanks again to Trifacta for their sponsorship, as well as to our speakers today, Will Davis, Eric Kavanaugh, and Evren Çakır for their insight into today's topic. My name is Sean Welch, and I'm very pleased to have been your host for today's event. I look forward to seeing you all again on December 5th, 2019. Have a great day.